Hey, hey.
How's it going?
Oh, it's going good. So weird.
You're out of focus.
Yeah, it's I'm using a new
Oh, there you are.
webcam, and it every now and again just decides to go out of focus. I'm not sure what that is, but it's weird.
Yeah.
But c'est la vie. It's all good.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I want to get a setup like yours. I mean, the camera. When I flicked through our old conversation the other day, and I was just like, Jesus, this camera is so nice. Like,
I don't remember.
Presuming it's the lens, but.
Well, I don't remember what I was doing at that point. I've been the whole year, experimenting.
Well, you had a big update, right? Because you sold your old camera and stuff, right?
I did sell. Yeah, I did sell this. I sold the C200, which is probably what I was using when I talked to you last. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do video work for a living. So
I know. I'm envious.
Like,
I'm envious.
Stuff around.
But that's it. It's the thing of like, it's ridiculous because I'm like this and I need someone like my wife to keep me in check. I think actually, generally speaking, not having money will keep you in check with something like photography or something like that anyway. I'm like always like looking at something like you sending your video over and I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I'm putting out videos. What am I doing?
Dude,
then you look at how much it costs and you're like, oh yeah, no, this is fun.
Yeah.
This is great. This looks
totally
amazing.
Fun. Yeah, it's the law of diminishing returns for sure. Where it's like, I'm not sure it's worth. Yeah, like, I mean, I for what I'm using this equipment for right now, it's massive overkill.
Right. Yeah. This is not made to be sitting on top of a monitor as like a webcam.
No. So, but yeah, I mean, dude, it's funny. Like even in video work, like I have a number of people that have asked me, oh, I want to get into doing video production or blah, 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 blah. How do I get into it? And I'm always like, and they're always asking about gear. Like that's always the first question. Like, what should I buy? What do I need to buy? And the thing I always say is like, well, do you have a phone? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, then you have a camera. So just start making things, like if you have a Mac, iMovie is free. If you have a PC, there's free, basic editing software out there. And I always tell people just start making things and don't buy stuff until you really are bumping up against the limitations of what you've got. And inevitably people are always disappointed with that answer because they're like, oh, you mean that nothing is stopping me from starting? And I'm
right.
Like,
yeah.
That's right.
Well, that's it, isn't it? We don't really want to do the actual hard grafting work. We want to be like accumulating things that we can, purchase and make us feel like we're doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's true at every stage. Like to this day, I find myself being like, well, if I just owned such and such a camera, I'd be legitimate. Or if I just had such and such a client, I'd be legitimate. Or if I just, blah, 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 got this award or this notoriety or got recognized by this community, I'd be legitimate. And it's like, you never feel it. I mean, if you are the kind of person that struggles with feeling legitimate, you'll feel that no matter what.
It won't get ticked. I struggle with this so much. I feel like I've dealt with this so many times and then it just sneaks up on me. It bites me and I'm like, whoa. And it takes a little while and I'm like, whoa, you're going in this comparison thing. You're going, oh, they seem happy because they have this. If I had that, then I'd be happy. Or their thing is bigger than mine or better, right? So I see your video and I'm like, well, everyone's going to think my videos suck or, or whatever. I'm like, let's be honest. No one is on YouTube watching this conversation for the video quality. They might be because you're on it actually, but the average call, it's like, what am I doing in this little world where I'm going, maybe if I saved up and maybe if I bought like a secondhand one, I could, we could skip a mortgage payment, it's like, what? It's like, this is ridiculous. The webcam will do. Like, you could film it on your phone. Like you said, I could be doing this on Zoom on my phone and it would probably be good enough quality. Probably better quality.
I mean, in the film world, they say story is king, right? So, and that's, but that's true just in everything. And so like what you're doing is you're talking about things that people really care about and that there's a community of people that really need to hear what you have to say. And that community, it's like you said, they're not tuning into your podcast and to your YouTube channel because of anything to do with like video or filmmaking. They're tuning in because they're interested in what you have to say, and that's where your value is. So yeah, I mean, does that comparison thing, does that show up for you when you're dealing with like different sort of maybe Instagram accounts or podcasts about deconstruction? Like, how do you wrestle with that? That sort of I'm not, I'm not legit, or I'm not notable enough, or there's people that are doing things that are more significant than what I'm doing. Like, how does that play out in your mind? Are you someone that wrestles with that stuff?
I'm astonished in how it comes out, because it actually, I feel like I don't know, maybe this is a qualification in comparison again, but I feel like I'm actually worse in a way, because I'm not someone that looks at another account that's amazing and goes, oh, I'm so shit. I look at it and go, I'm better than them. This is so unfair. Like, isn't that like my arrogance or whatever, But like, and it really, it catches me. I was talking to my wife about this the other day. What was it about? Okay, so Dirty Rotten Church Kids. You know those guys. Have you been on their show?
No, I haven't ever talked with them personally, but okay. Actually, I think you got me onto them on Instagram.
They are awesome. Great account, funniest people ever, amazing. They should be as successful, if not a lot more successful than they are, but they are blowing up. Like, they came on the scene a long time after me and like brought this podcast, started posting memes, and I'm like, I do podcasts and memes. Cool, great. More people like me. People need this. Yeah. And then they started just like skyrocketing, and I'm like, I'm not growing as fast as that. That's so unfair, right? This is my first thought. It's like, how come they're growing so fast? The reason they're growing fast is they're incredible. Like, there's no way around that. Doesn't mean that I'm not incredible.
Yeah.
But, this is different stuff, different people, different audiences, different, even just a title, right? Someone sees Phil Drysdale and they're like, oh, what does that mean? But someone sees Dirty Rotten Church and they're like, I'm one of them, or whatever, right? So there's all these different comparison things, but but that was one this week because they launched a Patreon, and I immediately was like, I'm going to join their Patreon. I love these guys. I want to support what they're doing. Joined it, jumped on their Discord that they've got, which, by the way, people, if you're listening to this, go support Dirty Rotten Church Kids. The cheapest one is like $4 a month, and they have a phenomenal Discord account with lots of conversation. But I go on and it is like conversation, like blowing up. Conversation is amazing. Yeah. And I'm sitting there, and my biggest thing is not, this is incredible. My first thought was, how come my Discord isn't always full of chat and, wonderful things? I probably have a similar amount of people on there. It's not about like they're making more money than me or anything stupid like that. That's ridiculous. This is like comparing apples to oranges. It's the thing of like, how come my people that follow me aren't talking all the time on Discord? This is so unfair. And I was talking about it with my wife. I was going, this is coming up and it's not healthy. This is not a healthy thing.
Oh yeah. And you're self-aware enough to recognize it in yourself and not like it.
Well, I think I'm on autopilot for a long time. Yeah.
I notice stuff like that in myself too. I'm just like I'm always plumbing my own motivations and going like, well, why am I doing this? And like, what am I seeking in this? And even in going on podcasts like yours and having conversations like these, that I'm always going like, is there a part of me that can't let go of some sort of spotlight? Like, is that part of my motivational structure? And like, is that okay? Because for some people, like being out in front of people, leading the way, like sort of being a pioneer and wanting to be sort of in the front of the pack in that way. For some people, they're just built that way. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it can definitely show up in your life in unhealthy ways. Like,
I walk that tightrope because I think I naturally weirdly, every time I move into a new community, people suddenly are like, oh, Phil, what should we do? And I'm like, what the fuck are you asking me? I don't know. I'm new here, but it just feels like people want to, it must be a personality, some way I come across, whatever. But I do like it on some levels. I really like it. On other levels, I hate it. Because I hate responsibility or, having to do things. But like, it's a weird one. But do you feel like you've always been a little self-aware of this and seen this stuff? Or do you think that's changed over your
I don't think time? I've always been self-aware. I think my wife has helped me a lot in that area. I mean, so my parents are incredibly loving, very supportive. They're the type of parents that, like, no matter what I do, my mom in particular would be like, "Oh, Johnny, that's just so great. Oh, you're just so clever. Oh, you know." And I think somewhere around my early 20s, life sort of taught me that I'm not always great. Like, I think I really did think that everything I did was awesome, you know, all through my teenage years, because, you know, I had a lot of affirmation, which is beautiful and wonderful, and lots of people don't get that, and that's, you know, so that's something I'm grateful for. But I definitely realized in my 20s, oh, I'm really capable of screwing up. I'm really capable of being wrong. I'm not good at everything. There are people out there that are much better than me at some things, and I had to sort of cultivate self-awareness, and recognize that at best all of our motivations are mixed.
Yeah.
And you know, my wife has helped me a lot in sort of seeing some of the stuff that is potentially unhealthy, and one of the things I always try to encourage people is, like, practice the skill of recognizing that you're wrong. Like, because we're all wrong about stuff here and there, and or sometimes a lot.
Yeah, I was gonna say here and there would be a good day for me.
Yeah, but you know, I think what really gets you is not being wrong; it's being unwilling to admit that you're wrong. And if you're one of the guiding principles for me this whole year with having conversations about God and faith and spirituality and Christianity is that if you can retain a posture of kindness and speak with people kindly and resist the urge to get angry or bitter or defensive, and if you can also practice the ability to look at your own positions or beliefs or whatever and go, you know, I might have been wrong, or maybe there was something I was missing. If you can do those two things, you can walk with a lot of confidence, because you don't have to perpetually prop up this image of yourself of always being right. And that's what we're doing when we're getting defensive. We're propping up this image that we've created. It's almost like an idol in a way. It's like I've created this idol of my own belief of who I am. And when someone tells me that I might be wrong or I might be missing something, it challenges that belief. And if you can get used to having that belief challenged and embrace the fact that, like, hey, if I was wrong about something and I can fix that, that's progress. You know, that's growth. And if you can make that mental shift, it can be really, really fruitful, I think, in your life.
Yeah. I think it's a totally different way of seeing life as a whole. Like, I mean, for a huge amount of people in life, I talked about this on Instagram this week, but like there's kind of like this in-out mentality. You arrive, you've got it, you take off all the boxes. Oh, I now know what God is like, what color they like, how they act, what they'll do on Thursday. You know, I know exactly what it is. And so I've arrived. So there becomes this danger to any change, because if there was a different answer, then it means my answers today are wrong, and it means I'm shit out of luck. I'm not in the in crowd. I'm not saved. I'm unsaved, and I'm deceived. So we have to be right. And therefore, there can't be change. There can't be a new idea. There can't be I'm wrong. And it feels like that's just something that Christianity almost like breeds in us, this black and white, here's your doctrines, here's all the things that are right. Anything touches those and we get super defensive, and it kind of makes sense, I guess, because it is a pretty high stakes issue, you know, to be wrong on.
We have these tendencies to draw boundary lines, you know, and who's in and who's out, and that's not that's as old as humanity, you know. So it's a very ancient tendency. It's a tribal, you know, who knows how long, you know, in the course of human evolution, like we lived in small groups for the majority of the time that human beings have existed, and it wasn't until, you know, something like, I don't know, 100,000 years ago or something like that, where we really began to build slightly larger groups, and we don't see real societies until the Mesopotamians, which is what,
really
like
recent,
5,000 years ago or something like that, or yeah, something in that range.
In that window, yeah, for sure.
I think the Sumerian culture was somewhere around 3000 BC, right? Or something like that. So it's like we don't see real societies that grow beyond just a small tribe. We don't see that until like 5,000 years ago. And in the course of human evolution, that's not very long.
No, yeah.
So we're fighting against...
It's a big adjustment.
Yeah. So we're fighting against these instincts, right? When we build these societies and we're trying to be more inclusive, and there's elements of our past that we have to push up against when we do that. And that's not always easy.
Yeah, no, it isn't. Yeah. Well, it's like what we talked about with self-awareness. Like, there's a lot of autopilot stuff going on just the way we're wired, right? You are wired for safety, not for truth. And so just to go, actually, I'd like to know what's true here, that requires a huge kind of battle of the brain overcoming, well, the brain, right? I don't even know what that means, but, you know, like, it requires you overcoming your basic instincts, your basic kind of drive to go, I don't want to be safe right now. I know I want to be safe, but I don't want to be safe. What's really going on? That's a massive internal struggle. And it makes you realize, it probably is a bit harsh for me to go, look at this idiot. They just don't want to know the truth. And it's like, well, of course they don't. They haven't wanted to know the truth for the last 1,000,000+ years. You know, It's like, why wouldn't they want to know it?
Yeah, I read this book about evolutionary psychology that blew my mind. It's called The Social Leap. It's by this
I've heard of this
evolutionary psychologist named William von Hippel, and it's awesome. It's I recommend it. It's fantastic. But one of the things he talks about is that we're it's like you said, we're wired for safety, not for truth, right? And his sort of take on that is that it appears that human psychology developed early on with the goal of persuasion, rather than the goal being the ascertainment of truth. It's the development of persuasion, and so like our brains are wired to be more interested in I'm more interested in persuading you to agree with me than I am to understand your belief.
Wow.
Or to even understand what's true. So persuasion is more important than truth.
That's so strange.
Psychologically. At least as far as how we've developed. So that's really interesting. Like when I read that, I was like, well, that explains so much that we see out there, right?
Yeah.
Like
that explains a few of my conversations at Thanksgiving, or you know.
Yeah. And then the other thing along those lines that blew my mind was that Sigmund Freud, the famous, psychologist, wildly misunderstood, I think. But he had this idea that religion was basically born out of the trauma of self-awareness, that human beings developed consciousness and self-awareness. We became aware of ourselves. We became aware that, we're, like children who become aware of their separation from their parents, that they're a separate self. When humanity evolved consciousness, Freud thought that was traumatic in the sense, because for the first time an animal knew that they were going to die at someday, that they discovered the future. They realized that there's potentially horrible suffering in their future as well. So it's like you discover all these things and you don't know how to explain it, and you don't know how to deal with it. And Freud thought that the development of religion was tied to that trauma, that it was a way of organizing your life and your thoughts and your perceptions of the world in a way that was that you could actually handle it.
Yeah.
And that rocked my world to discover that, because in conversations with believers, sometimes now I'm tempted to feel like they're clinging to something in maybe an unhealthy way. But now I'm sort of realizing like, well, that's a life raft for them.
Sure,
because without that, they're forced to confront the trauma of life, which I can totally relate to, because over the past couple of years, like deconstructing my faith and, discovering that I wasn't really able to believe in God, at least not in the way that I used to. that was traumatic for me. I mean, I went to therapy. Like I was like, I was like, it was deeply traumatic. And so that idea from Freud really rang true for me. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's something there.
Yeah. I mean, well, this is, I don't know if you're familiar with Campbell's work, like Power of Myth.
You know, I know of him, but he's on the list of
you would
writers
really
that I
enjoy
haven't
that.
gotten into yet. Yeah,
you would really enjoy it because that's it's a fantastic book. But he's got I think there's like a CBS like documentary on him that's like 4 episodes as well, and I think that's quite good if you're like God, I've got so much to read. I'd much rather watch a few episodes on YouTube or something.
I
that's
actually
probably,
like reading because I feel like I can absorb things better. And
that's interesting.
Candidly, sometimes you'll get to a paragraph and you'll read the first sentence and then you'll read the last sentence and you're like, oh yeah, I get the point. So
yeah.
You can sort of
it's hard to do that on YouTube.
yeah, because you don't know what's coming next. What if something profound happens and if I skip 10 seconds, I'm gonna miss it. So yeah.
Yeah, not too much danger of that around me, probably, but his stuff is so interesting though, because that is it. It's about the way that we frame our world in a story, and I think and it makes such sense that when you understand that, like, this collection of atoms and there's basically some gut bacteria that are like, we'd like to survive. Let's make this thing a bit smarter. Let's funnel some more resources up to the brain so it can think a bit better. Maybe it could work in teams so that we keep getting food. I mean, this is like really on a very basic level, the gut bacteria is the person in charge here. And that's developed our evolution. That's developed what we're doing. We exist to keep some bacteria alive,
Is that his thesis?
No. Sorry, this is just general kind of evolutional kind of views. But the point being that, like, that's bloody terrifying. The idea that, like, wait, what? So I'm not even really that important. It's just the gut. Well, of course you're important. The gut bacteria doesn't want to die. It's a terrifying thing. So we have to start making a story of like, oh, I'm a me. This is called Phil. And Phil, he lives in a house with his wife, Tilly, and we're doing this. And all that actually is really going on some very reductionistic, basic level is the gut bacteria is going, well, we got the body out of the rain, so that will make it easier for it to produce foods to keep feeding us so we can keep, like, churning out or whatever. Like, it's a wild, like, concept, but, I mean...
Well, that's humbling.
It is. Well, largely, we talk about the gut as the second brain, but a lot of scientists refer to the gut as the first brain, in a sense.
Whoa. I need to read on that.
It's fascinating. It's really interesting. If you read, there's a good book called, I think it's just called Gut, and it's really fascinating. It's all about how the body functions and the gut functions and how it makes choices throughout the body, long beyond, just like, oh, how will I consume this milk or whatever. But yes, it's fascinating. But the point being, it's really terrifying if we stop and go, oh yeah, so I'm a collection of atoms that at some point kind of grew together in a womb, got spat out, and I'm hurtling through space on a rock. I mean, it's all terrifying stuff. And so we sit down and we go, okay, what story am I going to tell? Oh yeah, houses, that's important. Yeah. Not like, I don't know. I mean, is a house more important than a tree? Or am I more important than a dog? Apart from the fact that I'm aware of what's going on, maybe, and I'm scared to die, and I know the future and the past, I can conceptualize those things. I can regret what I did in the past because of how it makes me feel today, and I can worry about the future. Like, maybe a dog can't do that, but other than that, am I more valuable than a dog?
Yeah. I don't know. Important to whom?
Right.
Yeah. Valuable to whom? Yeah. So, well, that's interesting. Like, well, that sort of gets into the idea of, like, are there objective values? But okay, I looked up gut. I'm going to read that because that's interesting. Because I heard a stat somewhere that, and I'm going to get this number wrong, I'm sure, but it is this shocking, whatever the number is. It's like 90% of the cells in your body are bacteria or something like that. Like the reason why that's confusing is like, the cells that make up your organs and stuff are much larger, I think, than the bacterial cells. But if you just look at the number of cells, the majority of the cells in your body, the vast majority, are bacteria.
Yeah, like I've heard this as well. There's more bacteria than there is you.
Yes, and so it's like it sort of it brings up the question of like what constitutes you.
Yeah.
Because there are processes going on, especially in your gut, like you said, that without which we wouldn't survive, right? Is that correct?
Yo, for sure.
Yeah.
And like there's things like if you zoom in on your eyes, you have little bugs that live on your eyes, like, and they on your eyelids and on your eyelashes, and they're consuming little things to keep your face all safe. And we've got these kind of like, it's a symbiotic relationship, right?
Yeah,
so the gut bacteria and whatever I am is some sort of symbiotic, but it's so symbiotic that it's all kind of me. Like, is that gut bacteria, if I got rid of that gut bacteria and was like, oh, I've got rid of this gut bacteria, I'd be dead, right? Like, I mean, I'd be dead.
So it's like, what constitutes you? And then on a psychological level, there's another layer to that. And I'm going to bring Freud back into the picture here. So Freud was one of the first people to conceive of the unconscious mind in an articulated way. And in the unconscious mind, he recognized that there were multiple personalities. And he conceived of those personalities in some ways as being separate entities. Like these entities are alive in your psyche in a way that they're actually like separately alive. And then they, at various times, they manifest themselves and they become embodied. So an example is, if you're really hungry, like all you are is a raging hunger machine, right? All you can think about is food. It's just going to be on your mind. It's going to be guiding all of your decisions. Like, how can I get to food? How can I get to food?
Right.
If you're aroused, sexually, like it's the same thing. It's like, remember being a teenager and there's all you can think about is sex.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a certain drive or a certain personality manifests itself, becomes embodied, and basically takes control. And Freud thought of those as actually separate entities within your own psyche. And then think about the fact that you can actually observe your own thoughts. So it's like, if you're like I've got 2 toddlers. The last couple days they've been pretty bad. And so I get frustrated, I get angry, and I get grumpy, and I'm having a conversation with my wife, and I'm just like, I know I'm irritable. I recognize that I'm irritable. I don't want to be irritable. I don't want to be angry, but that's how I feel right now. And it's interesting that that's possible. Like,
yeah,
because I'm experiencing anger, but I'm also stepping back and observing my experience of anger. And so you have to sort of ask the question, which is me? Which one's
Jon?
Am I the one who's angry, or am I the one who's observing the anger? And you could criticize that question and say, well, that's semantics, but it's kind of not. I mean, like, so this view of like what makes you is not such a straightforward question. Right. Psychologically and biologically, it's like your view of what constitutes you has a lot of gray areas.
Right. It gets really messy really fast in almost any discipline, right? I mean, any kind of like ology, you start really digging in, philosophy, theology. I mean, you could look at this from so many different ways. The beauty of something like, psychology is a bit more of a soft science, but, something very much biology. I mean, we touch and feel this stuff. And but it is a thing of like, all right, I've cut your arm off. So is the arm you or you? Okay, it's both you. So are you less you? Like, at what point do we keep cutting parts off of Jon and he's not Jon anymore, or things like, okay, so angry Jon getting frustrated with his toddler versus the person that's watching and going, oh, Jon's angry, classic Jon, or whatever, right? It's like, if let's say you get over your anger issues, whatever, somehow you transcend being angry ever, and you are able to deal with 100 toddlers and go, toddlers, what are you going to do? Laugh it away. Well, did one Jon kind of absorb the other? Did the other Jon die? Like,
where did he go?
What happened? Where was that? Because if that was you, it's a weird concept. I think of this when I don't know if you've ever done in the past. I mean, you've quite a good Christian upbringing, I think. But anyone that's done psychedelics, something like mushrooms or LSD or something like that, to a strong enough degree, just completely like kind of steps into that observer mode to some degree, which I've done a few times and have been probably the most profound experiences of my life. With that, I don't even say that lightly. I mean, I would say 100% the most profound experiences of my life.
I have heard that from a number of people.
But you really do observe.
Yeah.
And there's such an indifference. There's whoa, look at these stories I'm telling myself about this. And look at Phil, this body that is Phil, but it's not me. And I'm like, that's a kind of fun way to live. Sure, I could live like that and have that story and frame the world like that, but it doesn't really matter. Like, it's such a surreal...
Does it feel sort
it's
of
that
like...
to 10 times, you know?
Yeah. Does it feel sort of like the dissolution of the ego? Like, it's like...
So there's different degrees to which... I talk to people that have experimented in different ways, because I think a lot of people, when talking about something like this, you know, these are... They're fun party drugs for some people. They're therapeutic drugs for a lot of people. Like, they've been proven again and again, and we're starting to move towards legalizing them for, cancer, for hospice work, for trauma work.
Oh, yeah.
So there's lots of different ways to engage with it. And I think at lower levels, I don't think, generally speaking, in my experience, your whole ego dissolves. You do start like, whoa, this is crazy. This is a trip. This is whatever. Or you maybe have some profound thoughts here or there. But at the high levels, they talk about something like ego death goes on. And I've experienced that 3 times, and I wouldn't recommend it. And yet I would sign anyone up for on the spot if I thought they were ready. Like, I don't know if anyone's ready. I didn't enjoy it once, but I enjoyed it tremendously once it was over, and thought, whoa, that was probably one of the most important things I've ever been through.
Wow.
And I don't fear death in a way that I can't explain to people. But I used to fear death.
That's so interesting. So you used to be, like, you used to think about death and be afraid of it, and then you had this experience.
I didn't think about it much, but I can see that it was driving a lot of my decisions and a lot of the way I thought. And now I just go, oh gosh, death. Yeah, that'll be... There's an element of some of the experiences I've had where just you step out of time, you step out of space. I mean, it's really hard to describe something that is just, and what this is, who knows? I mean, could be just you going a bit crazy. You've just taken some hallucinogenic, your body's like poisoned, you know, you're doing weird things. Like, we don't know. Like, a lot of people talk about this mystically, like you stepped into a true realm or the realm above reality. Well, maybe, but maybe also I'm just tripping balls. I mean, who knows, right? We don't really know. But it feels that way, certainly, and it does something to the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah, to a degree, it's like, what's the difference? Because I have spent some time thinking about, like, what's the difference between spiritual and psychological, and I'm not so sure that I know how to separate the two, because I don't know if you've ever gotten into the phenomenologists like Heidegger or Binswanger or Boss or Hegel to a degree.
Not deeply.
It's like a total revolution in the way that you perceive reality. And so it's like Heidegger basically was like, okay, well, psychology and the sciences and all this stuff have attempted to describe the world in very empirical, physical, concrete ways. But like, that doesn't encapsulate so much of what we experience as human beings, you know? And he's like, you know, what are the constituent elements of love? You know, what are the components that make up the experience of pleasure or pain? You know, it's like, you can't reduce them. And so he sort of said, well, let's wipe the slate clean and look at everything through the lens of human experience. And so Heidegger's view is that, like, everything you experience is real. And if someone's like, well, it's just going on inside your head, Heidegger would say, well, like, what makes you say that that's not real? Because his point was that everything that we experience, well, I mean, everything that there is for each of us is experience. It comes to us in the form of experience. Yeah. And so, you know, when I think about, you know, like your experiences with, psilocybin or mushrooms or whatever it was, you know, like, those experiences are very real. And it's like, whether or not you're tripping or experiencing a higher reality, it's like, well, it's sort of all the same in a way, you know?
Yeah.
What I'm fascinated by is how I've heard this from so many people that have had these experiences. Something sticks, right? It's like not just like an experience and then you come back down. It's like, no, you're different now.
Yeah.
And what do you think for you? What are the things that stuck?
I think to me, like you're talking about like, you know, is this just a hallucination? In a sense, you start looking at things and go, it's all a hallucination. If you actually stop and think about this, if you actually stop and think about like, well, what is, you know, the fact that we can see is because there's something called light, and we have eyes that developed a certain way to see a certain way. Like if our eyes developed differently, I wouldn't see you. I would see this explosion of like, you know, bits flying everywhere. I don't know what I'd see, but it could be completely different. If my eyes were accustomed to be slightly different, maybe could see slightly more effectively or slightly less, it could be so different. And so in a sense, like this whole thing is a bit of it's a story we're telling ourselves. And I think that to me has just kind of like blown my world wide open, but also just experiencing, and again, you sound like a crazy person whenever you talk about something like this, because you're talking about something that kind of has to be experienced in a sense. But or at least conceptualized or contextualized. It's very hard for you to do that. You know, you explain to a young kid what sex is and they're going to go like, right? Because they don't have a sex drive. They don't have any kind of context for love in that sense.
Yeah, it sounds gross. And then
you talk to someone about that to like a teenager and they're going to get horny, you know? So it's just a totally different, context and different things. So, but it feels like in a sense, you're talking to someone that just, because they've not got that drive, that experience, that whatever, they're going to be like, well, you sound a bit crazy. But in a sense, stepping out of time as well, like almost just, it feels like you almost freeze everything. And there is just, it's very terrifying. A lot of these experiences. My wife was laughing at me because we were talking about this and she's like, you don't do things by like halves ever. Like you're like, when you went to try and do, mushrooms, you research and you go, okay, what is like, how do I get the experiences? How do I'm bypassing the therapeutic, I'm bypassing the fun. I want to go to existential dread, terror, life-changing spiritual encounter. Straight there. That's all I want to do. Don't care about anything else. She's like, most people would go like, oh, maybe just try a small amount, have some fun. No, I'm a bit safe with this. No, I'm just all in. So I think like there is this thing of like, you have these radical encounters and you go, what even is time? Like, what is time? If we stop and talk about this, you know, you talk to a theoretical physicist and they're going to really mess with your head, and taking something like that, you also do that as well. You kind of start and go, well, this is a weird thing we're kind of like agreeing on. We agree on it. That's really the only, but like you're saying, like,
right,
the subjectivity of all this, right?
Yeah.
It's so subjective. What is, you know, you talk about people like Heidegger and it's like, well, what is real? Oh yeah, this little thing, I observed this, so we know this is true. And it's like, well, you observed it. You observed it. Well, yeah, but they observed it too. Okay, cool. But you observed them seeing it. And then you heard them say to you that they agree. You might be a duck living on a tomato in the sun. I don't know. Having a hallucinogenic experience. I don't know, right? I mean, we're still
you get
working through
to the whole brain in the vat conversation. You know, it's like you don't know that you're not a brain in a vat being fed electrical impulses. Like,
absolutely. Are we all in the Matrix, right? Feeding machines.
Yeah.
And of course, like, you know, the simulation, all these different things, like, of course. But my point is, I guess there is some level of skepticism of like, well, let's just hold this a lot less tightly. And agree that we're all kind of telling these stories.
Yeah. At some point you have to come back down to earth because we have to like live our lives. Like those gut bacteria demand satisfaction, Phil.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by the way that matters of faith and religion interface with people's like needs and the way that it interfaces with people's need to organize their lives in such a way that they can make sense of it and find meaning.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes you hear about human beings being conceptualized as like happiness seeking machines, but I don't think that's right. I think we're in a sense meaning-seeking machines.
Yeah.
Which encapsulates happiness to a degree, because when I'm doing something deeply meaningful, I am happy.
Yeah.
But happiness is like a byproduct. It's not something you can go straight at. There's this I don't know if he's a philosopher or what he's considered, but Zizek, are you familiar with I'm going to pronounce his name wrong. Slavoj Zizek. But he said happiness is a byproduct of striving for something greater or something like that. And you can never achieve it by aiming directly at it. And I think meaning is the thing that we really are seeking.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've been wrestling with the last 6 months, is like when you step back from the apparatus of Christianity, which is what was providing my life with a lot of meaning.
Yeah.
Like, when you step back from that, how do you rebuild a new framework for meaning seeking? You know, how do you find meaning? And have you sort of had those experiences, and how's that played out in your life?
It's interesting. I don't know. I think I am probably very driven by meaning, but I don't know if I think about it enough. But it's really common. Like, I get this message daily.
Yeah, I'm sure
because
you
there
do.
is this thing, like the second you let go of, even like a concept of God, you may even keep God, but the concept, a concept or a part of it, or a part of how you frame your faith, it has this knock-on effect on, like, well, what's my purpose, or why are we here, or, you know, like if you know, if there isn't we fall, then Jesus saves us, then we get saved, then we save others, like, you know, this, like, and then we all get to live in heaven, and like there's this kind of like nice laid out kind of A, B, C, D, we get to Z, we're all happy.
Right.
As soon as you kind of like start knocking a few of those components out, you start to go, wait, well, where are we going? What's happening here? It's a very, it's a terrifying thing, right? I mean, that's where a lot of the existential dread comes from, is like,
it's very
we like feeling we're on this kind of path. And so when people start like taking the path apart and going, let's just wander around, it's fine. That's a very, it's a beautiful way to live in a sense, right? It's nice to, instead of going, if you go for a walk with your family, instead of going on a nice basic trail, you know, we don't want to walk on a sidewalk through San Diego. We want to go and like walk on, like, you know, through a forest and explore it. That's a much more exciting and fun thing to do. Possibly, I don't know, maybe you want to just go to the shops.
I like them both.
Yeah, well, exactly. But if you're going to the shops, you want a sidewalk that leads you straight to the shop, right?
Yeah.
But there is something exciting about going, oh, let's just go to the forest and let's see who can find the biggest twig, you know, the stick or whatever. Or can anyone find a berry? Don't eat that. You know, like whatever. That's fun. It's exciting. But it is, if you just did that constantly, I mean, humans evolved away from it, right? That's probably what we were initially, is just kind of aimlessly wandering around trying to find any food to feed the gut bacteria, you know, so we could survive another day. And at a certain point we were like, maybe we could build a society. And then once we have society, we go, oh, maybe I could be a police officer. I could be a farmer. I could, you know, we start to build these roles for ourselves. And I think Christians, regardless if they're an accountant or a pastor or whatever, there is this kind of spiritual meaning, this spiritual purpose, a spiritual component that when you take that away, being an accountant doesn't feel very meaningful. Being a professional footballer or a videographer or whatever, it doesn't feel as meaningful when you take away this kind of eternity, this God in the sky giving you a pat on the back for doing it or guiding your steps. And that's a really hard thing to replace. Like, it's a really tough thing to replace.
Yeah. What in your life, like, what do you feel like is the greatest source of meaning for you? And, you know, after all the journey you've been through, like, where do you find meaning primarily?
I think I make meaning. I think that this is the thing that if you take a step back and go, well, hold on, what have we been doing, right? So again, it's a bit like The Observer. You take a step back, or you take some psilocybin, or you meditate, or whatever it is, right? Or you hang around with some toddlers, whatever it is that causes you to step outside and go, what is going on here? Maybe toddlers is a good example of that. You take a step back and you look and you go, I've been doing this all along anyway. I just agreed with a lot of other people. But at some point, I took a step back. I sat down and went, yeah, this is the meaning I'm going to agree on. Now, maybe I was born into it. I didn't have much of a choice. You know, I mean, of course, there's lots of components as to how much we choose to make that meaning.
Right.
But we still make it. At some point, we're going, yeah, I'll buy in on this. There's a God in the sky. He wants me to do good, but don't worry if you're bad because Jesus died. It's all right. Yeah, cool. And then what's the deal? We go to hell or heaven? Or we're not going to go to hell, but other people are, so we should get them to heaven. Great, cool. Now I know what I'm doing. Like at some point, we're buying into this on some level. And so at some point we can go, well, hold on. What would be a different story I would buy into right now? Like looking at the world the way I see it now, what would I buy into? And I think for me, what I found really helpful, I don't know if you've kind of read much of like atheists and secularists, humanists, people like that don't have a God. When you read about how they create meaning, how they frame the world, you realize, gosh, yeah, that would give me a lot of meaning if I saw it that way. Or, you know, and you start to realize, yeah, I could do that. Like, of course. I think you lose the security of the authority figure that's given you it. That's what I was about to
ask about. Yeah. So I have found that for people that are from a Christian background specifically, that are accustomed to their meaning sort of being given to them in a certain form, it can be very difficult to develop the almost like the motor reflexes or the motor skills to build your own meaning.
Yeah.
Because it feels, I think at first on some level it feels counterfeit. Because I think in Christianity, there's this sense that like anything that comes from you is inherently bad, right? Any goodness in me is coming from the Lord. And I'm inherently bad and sinful. So like me trying to make my own meaning, that's the absolute thing that I've been taught to avoid doing my entire life. So it's a difficult thing to sort of go into like, oh, that thing that always seemed bad is actually maybe the answer. That's hard. That's a hard leap. So how
have you gone about that? Do you feel like you have made progress in navigating that, in learning to trust yourself, to kind of believe you have a bit of an internal compass that you might be able to create your own meaning? Like, or is that something you still wrestle with, kind of like this kind of thing of like, well, don't trust Jon.
It's a process into all sorts of
mischief.
It's a process for me. I'm still working on it. I have moments where I feel confident and I'm like, okay, I know who I am. I know what I want to do in life. And then I have other moments where I just question everything. And the hard thing for me is that I feel like Christianity did provide like an anchor. It provided some sort of certainty that I could attach myself to, and I could always come back to when I felt uncertain. And then without that, it's like, well, when I feel uncertain, what do I go back to now?
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, that sense of being unmoored, that sense of being sort of just adrift, is really, really terrifying. And it's not so easy to replace that. Especially if you're replacing it with make your own meaning. I think for people who are so accustomed to receiving meaning from something, or like at least receiving instructions on how to perceive meaning, it's very difficult to make your own meaning. I saw this I saw this meme that makes me laugh so hard, and I'm sure you've seen it. In fact, I might have even seen it on your page. I can't remember, but it was basically, it said something about what Satan whispers to you, and it was like, the meme was Satan doesn't say to you, believe in me. He whispers into your ear, believe in yourself. And the caption was, Satan sounds rad as hell. Or something like that.
Seriously, like, where can I get Satan as my life coach?
Yeah, it was like, I think the caption was like, I know this is supposed to be like making Satan sound bad, but he sounds rad as hell. And that's funny. Just like such a funny observation, because it is true that in Christianity, I actually think we're taught to we are taught in Christianity to be suspicious of ourselves, suspicious of our own motivations, suspicious of our own desires. And because of that, like this whole like believe in yourself thing, like at least in the Christian circles I came up in, that would have been, people would have been like, no, you don't want to believe in yourself. You want to believe in the Lord.
Yeah. Well, the heart is wicked above all things. And all this kind of stuff that oh no, don't trust your heart. Don't follow your heart. And
like I even, you know, like in some of these online, you know, engagements I've had, you know, sometimes see in the comments like, oh, Jon talks about he uses the word feels a lot. Like I'm criticized for just talking about feelings.
How you feel?
Too much. And I'm like, but that's where we all live.
Yeah.
You know, like reason is fine. I think rationality is important.
Yeah.
But like,
well, that person that's commenting that isn't like literally like a robot just trolling the internet to find inaccuracies. They are commenting because they feel upset that you said feel. Yeah. Right? You know, it's like at the end of the day, right? It's like the angry pastors like yelling at women because they can't be leaders because they're too emotional, and they're like red in the face yelling about it. And it's like, feels like you're being emotional here.
Yeah.
Are you sure you can be a leader? Like,
yeah.
It's such a, you can't see your own component of that, right? You can't see that you're making your own meaning. You can't see that you're being driven by feeling, etc.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I think unlearning that thing of like, don't trust yourself, don't trust your instincts, don't trust your feelings, I think that's important to unlearn.
Yeah. Well, how have you gone about doing that? Like, what are the practical things that have kind of moved the needle for you in that area?
I mean, practically, like when I'm contemplating different points of view on things, you know, I try to read books from all kinds of different people. I mean, in the last year, I've read books from Buddhists, I've read books from atheists, I've read books from Christian apologists, and of course, like I'm getting these wildly different perspectives and points of view and conflicting claims about what the truth of reality is, and you have to sort of like make decisions about what you believe based on something. And I have sort of I've come to this place where I slow down and I go, what is my intuition telling me? Yeah. And I've been criticized for talking about intuition. And people are like, well, you can't trust your intuition. And I'm just like, well, what else do you have? Because a Christian will be very quick to say, well, I go back to what the Bible says. And I'm like, okay, well, how do you know that that's trustworthy? And then they'll, you know, give a bunch of answers of one kind or another. And I'll go, well, how do you know that those reasons for believing the Bible are trustworthy? And when it comes right down to it, it always comes back to something along the lines of, well, it has tracked well with my experience. Yeah. And that's an intuition. So it's like, because, you know, from a purely survivalistic point of view, it's like human beings, we are better off when our perception of the world, if we can make our perception of the world as close to reality as possible, that's good, right? It's better for our survival. We can make our way in the world more adequately, more successfully if our perception matches reality as close as possible. Yeah. It's never going to be perfect, but you know, so I sort of lost my train of thought there, if I'm being honest.
No, it's good. It's really interesting because I think that matching perception to reality is it's interesting because when you think about like how a lot of religion, you go back far enough, right? And you look at the kind of, I don't know, we're sacrificing our virgin daughter so the sun comes up tomorrow, you know, because someone has to sacrifice one of their daughters every night so that the sun beats the moon god or whatever, right? I mean, like, we're talking about primitive points where the sun goes down and we actually shit ourselves, right? We're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? We don't even think about the fact that this has happened for like our entire lives and it's always come back, but it's always come back because we killed someone, or, you know, we burned some grain, or we slay a cow, or whatever. We did a moon dance, or, you know, to ward away the moon and to bring back the sun, whatever it is. But the point is, at some point, we had to create a story to make us feel safe about something that was a very terrifying thing to us for some reason. Yeah. Our perception, our reality, the way we frame the world, we didn't really understand. So it just goes dark sometimes, and like, just what animals come out? They might eat us while we sleep. This is bloody terrifying. So we start creating a moon god and a sun god, and and then we have power over bringing that sun god back and pleasing the sun god. At no point would even Christians would agree with this. Hopefully, at no point did anyone actually like meet a sun god, or the sun god came down and was like, right guys, here's the rules, this is how it works. There's a moon god, sun god, gonna need one virgin daughter every day. You better get on producing those, maybe build a bigger tribe. Like this is just something that we kind of made up to feel better. And then at some point someone like was like, hey guys, I made this thing called a telescope, and I've been looking up in the sky. I think we're just kind of spinning around this thing called the sun, and because of the way the earth spins, just every now and again we can't see it. It's over there, but it'll be fine. It'll come back tomorrow, like it's always done. And everyone's like, oh good, we can stop killing our daughters, right? Or whatever, right?
Right.
As we move on. And there's this thing of like, we are getting to the point where so many of our concepts of what is God, what is this religious practice, if we stop and evaluate, they make so much sense to a certain group of people at a certain time. You're like, of course you were terrified about this. Of course you were worried about this. Of course you were obsessed about women's hymens not being broken. If that kid wasn't your kid, it would ruin your lineage, and you had no way to ensure that it was your kid, and whatever. But like now we've got contraception, we've got lots of medical procedures. Virginity is a totally foreign concept, or it should be a foreign concept to us today compared to what it was when it was to do with women or property and power dynamics, and so we consistently should be reevaluating these stories that we're telling ourselves. And I think the danger is when we don't, what it causes us to do is actually our perception, our reality are drifting away. Earlier at time, they were kind of trying to close that gap by giving us something that would work, but we didn't know what would. So we just made something up that kind of went, oh yeah, the sun's gone down. Well, that's because the moon god's fighting the sun god, but the sun god's going to win. It's fine. But as we drift the other way and people start talking about, the earth and the earth is spinning and the sun, if you're still talking about the sun and moon gods, that is now drifting so far apart, those perceptions and reality, that you're going to create a lot of issues for yourself. And I feel like that's what a lot of Christianity is doing for itself. It's creating these huge issues with backwards ideas, purity concepts, or needing the earth to be 6,000 years old, or, it's creating these crazy narratives that is causing it so much trouble.
It seems to me that there is a period of time where a certain set of beliefs really serves you. And then you grow and you discover that way of looking at the world isn't serving you like it used to. And I think Christianity is in a place now where there are beliefs within Christianity that are still serving people well. So I'm not one of those that thinks that it's like this. Like, I don't personally think that Christianity is, strictly speaking, a way of people holding on to power. Like, I think that people have abused Christianity to have power and hold on to it, but I don't think that's what it is at its nature. I think there are things within Christianity that have been very good for people and beneficial for people. But the problem with any belief set that's not updatable, which any belief set that's based on like a scripture that's not updatable, you're going to be able to update your interpretation of that scripture to a degree, but it's like, we amend the Constitution here in America, but we don't amend scripture. Yeah. And scripture is much older. And so it's like, well, yeah, you're going to have some things that as culture evolves, as our understanding of the universe evolves, there's going to be some things where it's like, people are going to have to start choosing. Do I hold on to the traditional sort of interpretation of my faith? Or do I trust that as a culture and as a species do I trust that this growth we're experiencing is good? Like here in the US, a few years ago when same-sex marriage was legalized, my gut instinct immediately, my intuition was that like, that's good. And I wanted to celebrate it, but I was in a Christian band in a public space and I knew that I couldn't say that publicly. Right. And I was like, if I say that publicly, probably we won't have a career anymore. And then I remember Dan Hazeltine from Jars of Clay saying that publicly, more or less. And then I didn't see Jars of Clay around the Christian festival circuit anymore after that.
Yeah.
So it's like confirmed. So like that's one example.
He had terrible intuition apparently as to where that would go.
Yeah, I mean, I think he might have known. I don't know. I haven't.
I'm pretty sure he would have known. I don't think many people grow up in Christianity and think that that's going to go well for them. I think they just come to a point where they go, "Okay, I'm going to do it anyway."
Yeah. So I think there's a number of issues on which Christians are put in a difficult place, where it's like the culture you're participating in is saying that these things are not okay. But then society as a whole is growing into a wider and more inclusive space. And when it comes to homosexuality, transgender issues, women's rights, I mean, racial issues, which, here in the U.S., particularly this year, that's come back up in a way that, it's like, if we're being honest with ourselves, we have to admit we haven't dealt with that fully. And so I see all these issues in which, especially the evangelical Christian church in America is clinging to certain ideas when the rest of society wants to grow. Yeah. And what I'm seeing is a number of people like myself who grew up in the church and can't and feel like it's actually like Christian beliefs, at least the way they're expressed by the majority of sort of evangelical Protestant Christians in the U.S. and North America and the Western world, I guess, as a whole, that belief set is actually, it's limiting our ability to love people as fully and affirm people as much as we want to. Yeah. And so I think this movement of people away from Christianity is sometimes characterized from inside the church as being like a descent into sin, or like a rejection of traditional values. And what I want to tell people is like, no, what I'm seeing is like people that I know that are stepping away from Christianity are often doing it because they feel like it's not allowing them to love and affirm people as much as they want to. Yeah. Huge. It's a journey towards inclusivity and kindness and affirmation and love, not away from it. And if I feel like if Christianity and the sort of Christian culture of the Western world doesn't recognize that and come to grips with it, it's going to become far less relevant really rapidly.
Right. Well, it will become the group that worships the sun god. I don't remember what they're called. Do you know anyone that does that? Like, that's really, give it 50, 100, 200 years. I don't know how long. Yeah. But if they don't work, they are losing this battle. It's a really painfully slow transition because of that. Even when the majority has kind of moved on. It's interesting. It makes me think of, like, you mentioned the Constitution. It makes me think of something like I remember reading recently that in America, consistently, again and again and again and again in polls, the majority, and a good majority, like 70, 73, 75%, consistently around that kind of number, want gun reform. Not necessarily banning all guns and get rid of them, but they want some form of greater measures of safety around the topic of guns. So, no question, America as a whole would like this to happen. And yet, consistently, they're like, well, that's an impeachment, an infringement on the Constitution. That's you can't touch this document that we have, which, of course, we're talking about a part of the document that was added on. So we would change the document anyway. Right? Yeah. So it's already something we added anyway. But we hold to, and I think it's interesting, even the Bible, right? I mean, we look at that and it's like, well, actually, hold on. The Christians that are clinging so hard to this Bible, they don't read it the same way as the Jews. They changed it. Correct. Right? So at some point we change it to the point where we're like, okay, we're done here. Now no one make any changes. We're good. Everyone's happy. Right. Done. We're going to kill anyone that changes anything. And it feels like we do this in I guess the reason I bring that up is I guess it's not inherently Christian. I know there might be overlaps between those two groups, of course, but you can look at just another category of someone like American, and they do it in a different area for a different context, where the majority is wanting to move forward in one way or another. And I think most people would say trying to make something like a gun a safer tool would be a move forward. And yet a minority going, no, don't our worldview, you're messing with that.
I'm Canadian,
it's a
so
strange one.
The gun thing in the U.S. is very strange to me. But I also try to recognize that as a Canadian, there might be cultural things that maybe I just like don't totally get. So I'm trying to leave a space open for understanding that. But I'm with you. I'm sort of like, why are we so precious about our guns? I don't understand. But, you know, I'm still trying to understand that one a little bit. But
I became a lot more open to guns moving to America and spending 4 years in very, very kind of right-wing part of America. And I was like, oh yeah, like before I was like, oh, guns. What's the thing?
Why do you need a gun?
Don't have them. That would be easier.
Yeah, you're statistically less safe if you have one.
Exactly, right. Now, why do you protect my family? They're going to be murdered and raped. And I'm like, are you like the head of the mafia? Like, does that happen to people often in America? I don't know if I want to be in America.
Are you making those kinds of enemies that often?
We don't have guns, and most people don't follow it. But I did, living there, I was like, oh gosh, yeah, I understand this is fun. It's great for sport. I understand hunting. I'd love to hunt a bit more. Like I understand all these things, and I get like the concepts of freedom and some of the undergirding concepts. I'm like, yeah, like I totally stand for those things as well. And so coming back to Europe, I was like, oh guys, they're not entirely crazy here. There's some real points here to be made. The end result, I'd still like to see changed, but
I feel the same.
It's fascinating.
I think to go back to what you were saying about revising beliefs, like. I was thinking about this the other day, and I posted something about it on Instagram, you know, that I was raised in an evangelical sort of, situation. And the evangelical movement, you know, is a Protestant movement. So it came out of the Protestant movement. And the Protestant movement came out of the Catholic movement. The Catholic movement came out of the early Christian sort of church before it was, you know, fully orthodox and articulated. That early Christian church came out of a Jewish apocalyptic tradition, which was Second Temple Judaism. Mm-hmm. That emerged from sort of the First Temple Judaism. That's probably not a correct term. I'm not saying that. I'm butchering probably all of these terms, but you get what I'm.
Yeah. And this is constant evolvement.
And Judaism emerged from a vast landscape of polytheistic beliefs. Mm-hmm. So it's just like. When we question our beliefs and wonder if there's a better way to be, we're not rejecting tradition. We're participating in it.
Yeah.
And
it's beautiful.
And that's what I see, for instance, the progressive Christian movement trying to do. Like, and for all its faults, like there's problems, often when I read progressive Christian thinkers, my tendency is to think like, well, you've got the problem right. I'm not sure I agree with your solution, but I see what they're trying to do. It's like how there's things about Christianity that a lot of people don't want to let go of because it provides them a lot of good things. But then there's also things that like, well, I don't want anything to do with that. Like telling women that they have to sit silently in church. You know, that's in the New Testament. I don't want anything to do with that. Mm-hmm. The affirmation of slavery in the Bible is quite clear. I don't want anything to do with that. And so the progressive Christian movement, I feel a lot of empathy for because I'm like, you're trying to hold on to this while you're moving forward. And for myself personally, on a much deeper level, letting go of this thing has made more sense for me. But I share this sort of desire to hold on to something because I don't, I think a lot of times when people step out of faith, they're very quick to look for a new identity. And that new identity often becomes criticizing the faith they just came from. Mm-hmm. And I think there is there is some value to that, because you have to look at it critically and go like, what was I onto, and what were all the problems with that, and how can I untangle all that? But at some point you have to reorient yourself and find a new way of being. And I feel like that's the phase I'm in now, where like, yeah, I can look at Christianity and I can poke all these holes and I can explain to you all the issues I have with it. But what I'm really interested in is how to be in the world in the healthiest way I can, and bring about the most good.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm chasing now, I feel like. Do you feel like that's the phase you're in, or what does that look like for you?
I don't know. I really don't know. It's interesting. I saw you posted the other day, you posted deconstruction without reconstruction is destruction.
Yeah.
That was you, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I feel like I saw it and I was like, ooh, we'll talk about that. And I think there is like this, there seems to be like a whole different bunch of groups that want to frame what deconstruction is. And there's people that are like, oh, it should be just, deconstruction,
right,
and you move on and you do something else. Or other people are like, oh no, you should reconstruct. Let's tear apart Christianity, but to the point of building Christianity into something new again, maybe like more kind of progressive.
Sure.
There's all sorts of different people that have the different ideas of what we should be doing. And then you're going to have different stages, right? So people will be in a place where, their deconstruction will look very destructive. It will look very much like, burn this fucker to the ground, that's honestly, a very natural thing for a lot of people to do.
Well, and like anyone who's ever done a renovation in a home, it's like you start with demolition and it's destructive. It's not clean, it's messy, but it's necessary. So when I say, deconstruction without reconstruction is just destruction, I'm not criticizing the destruction part. That needs to happen.
Yep.
I just know that like I can't live in a demolished kitchen. After the demolition, we have to build something new, and it doesn't have to be the same thing, but you can't live without building something.
Yeah. I think that's my question. I guess the thing that reconstruction is such a triggering word for so many people, because
I noticed that
it's used by Christians. That's why I think on the whole it's used consistently by pastors to say, oh yes, well you deconstruct, but you know that you need to reconstruct, and what they're saying is that you question your faith, you ask all these questions, you tear things apart, but you'll be coming back in 3 weeks or a year or 10 years. And
perhaps
I don't think that's necessarily what it should mean.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is like, when we talk about something like that, like, you deconstruct a house, right? You're like, that can look like so many different things. It can look like I've just wiped out my kitchen and my dining room and I'm like extending it entirely into my garden, and it's a nice like update, and it's like, it's moderate, sizable bit of work. You don't want to be around the kitchen anytime it's getting work done. But this is still going to be the same house. I'm going to look around the house and go, yeah, same house, right? And you might think something like progressive Christianity might be something like that, where it's a major overhaul. We gutted. A couple of things are gone and we built something new in their place that are totally different. And I think progressive Christianity does that really well. An amazing movement for people that are looking for something like that. But I do think there's certain people that are going to maybe absolutely just knock the whole thing down and build something right there in its place and build a whole new thing. And then there's a group of people as well that deconstruct because this building is unsafe and it's built on a bog. And we just need to knock it down, pack up and leave and find some solid ground to build on. Now, I'm not saying any one of those positions is the truth. I'm saying different people will approach this differently and find a different truth or thing that works for them. But I guess the question is, when we talk about reconstruction, is like, we're talking about, is this a mild deconstruction and reconstruction, like a tweaking of what we're doing? Is it rebuilding in the same place? Are we rebuilding a faith in the same kind of like framework and things like that? And I think it's hard not to. You can't lose who you are, right? I mean, you are Christianity in a sense because that's where you came from. Or are we literally burning this down, moving on and becoming a pagan Wiccan or whatever, right? I mean, who knows what that looks like, right?
Well, I think when you adopt a new belief set of any kind, or when you get better at building meaning for yourself in some way, I think you are reconstructing. I guess I didn't realize the degree to which that is sometimes associated with a return to Christianity.
Did you get a lot of comments from people that did seem upset about it?
I got hot takes.
You always get that, right?
But that's expected. A lot of people saying, well, you shouldn't rush. Like, you shouldn't rush the deconstruction process. And I agree with that. Like, when you're taking things apart, like, you should take your time. And to come back to intuition, like, I think you'll know, I just knew, I knew that I went through a period of I was soaking up information about Christianity that I hadn't realized before, and like Bible contradictions and theological issues and all these things. And I was to a degree almost I hesitate to use the word enjoying, because it was actually not really an enjoyable process, but I was very interested in taking it apart.
Yeah.
And
like a morbid curiosity almost.
Yeah, it is a morbid curiosity. That's a good way to say it. But I hit a point where railing on the inconsistencies of Christianity no longer felt satisfying. And I felt like, for me, I was like, well, I'm a husband, I'm a father. I need to find a way of being in the world where I can be healthy and be productive and be present for my kids and serve my wife well. And so I need to build something. And that became sort of the thing that compelled me more than taking apart my old faith. I felt like I got to the end of the deconstruction, and I was like, it's not like I'm no longer looking at that stuff. Like, I still am reading and, learning a lot more. It's almost endless what there is to learn.
Yeah.
But I'm now doing it with the goal of, like, how can I get to a healthy place as a human being, and how can I live better? And what beliefs and perspectives are going to help me in that aim?
Yeah.
And that's what reconstruction means to me. So it doesn't mean a return to Christianity necessarily, although for me it has involved a renewed appreciation for my Christian roots.
Yeah.
And recognizing, like, hey, there's actually some stuff that was imparted to me by Christianity that was good. And by nature of being raised in Christianity and also raised just in the Western world, to some degree, I can't extricate myself from Christianity because I've been so influenced by it on so many levels, and so have you, and so have all of us that grew up in a Western culture. And so for me, I guess that's sort of the integration and the healing of going, like, hey, I don't have to believe that Christianity is right about everything to believe that it was touching on some things that were good.
Yeah.
And that feels like a healthier perspective than me just wanting to tear it all down.
Yeah. I do wonder if it's possible to do that early on. I constantly play with this idea. I'm trying to help people get to that place as quick as possible, but and at the same time, I'm like, it doesn't really matter if it takes you 10 years or 10 minutes. But it's certainly a nicer place to exist at times. Yeah. It feels a bit more peaceful and
you'll know when you're ready.
Less traumatic. Yeah.
For each person, like, they'll know when they're ready to get to that place.
Yeah.
You'll wake up one morning and you'll be like, I can't stay angry.
Yeah.
Or I can't stay hurt.
Yeah.
Or I can't stay bitter. I don't want to live that way. And so you find a way to integrate all of your experiences into a healthier perspective, I think.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's the goal. And I think even people who are in the hardcore deconstruction, the destructive phase of that, I think deep down, that's always the desire. The desire is to get to a healthier place.
I don't think anyone deconstructs to no end. I mean, generally speaking, people are deconstructing because they were seeking a truth. They were, like you're saying, trying to love more purely, and they're like, well, I can't do it with this truth. So can I approach this Bible verse differently? And then before they know it, they're kind of slipping down the slope and like, oh, Jesus, what do I hold on to? Like, you know, like lots of things are falling apart. But that's a natural process. In our research, so we're doing research into the deconstruction community. And we've got a rough framework, because one of the biggest issues you have when looking at this is, and the researchers I'm talking to, and they're going, so what's a deconstructing Christian? Define that for me. And I'm like, interesting. So that's where you had to start, is we had to actually build a framework. So I mean, it links back to Derrida's like work on deconstruction. He's the father of deconstruction. And I mean, it's a technical term. It has definitions and categories in which that is deconstruction and this is not. And one of the things that in doing that research really helped frame the whole process for me and help me understand as well is that you can't deconstruct without reconstruction. It's the same thing. All it is we're looking at one truth. So there's three components basically that we have. That is, if you tick these boxes, you're deconstructing. If you're not deconstructing. You can still call yourself deconstructing if you want, but you're not. Because there's a lot of people in that bracket because they found a bit of community around this community and stuff, but they're not technically deconstructing. They're just evolving in their faith or changing their faith or whatever. But the first one is that they have to question core values of their faith tradition. So if you're not questioning the core values of faith, if you're just questioning, well, is mid-trib really the thing? Maybe it's post-trib. Like, you're not deconstructing, okay?
That's not deconstruction, yeah.
You're maybe a bit of a pain in the ass to your pastor or something. But yeah, exactly. You're not weeping at night. But the second part is that you then have to find that they don't add up, and you change your core values. So you change those core traditional values to your faith. And so there is adoption of a different outlook. It might even be my new outlook is, I'm not really sure yet, but you do adopt new views. And if you're not doing that yet, you are starting to deconstruct, but there's this other component there of you are needing to change your core values. They don't add up, so you have to change them. And then the third part, which is really interesting, and this is the bit where people either don't tick the box or do, is you walk away with your new values less certain of them than you were of your last values. There needs to be a shift from fundamentalism to less dualism, less black and white, less fundamental, a humble holding of this new idea going, I don't believe that anymore. I kind of believe this, but please note the word kinda. I'm not, and I'm going to live my life as though this is absolutely true, maybe, but I'm still going to hold it lightly going, probably going to be wrong somewhere at some point on some of these ideas. And I think that is what draws the line. So, because what I look at someone like progressive Christianity, I think at times people that are deconstructing will go into something like progressive Christianity, but actually I think often they're then going to leave if they're really deconstructing, because something like progressive Christianity still is fundamental. It still holds a black and white. It still says, well, this is the truth. You have to believe this. There is a God, or Jesus did this, or this is what Jesus' death means, or whatever it is. They're going to have some things there that is like, no, we're pretty fundamental. We are certain of this. Just as certain as we're as certain of this as John Piper is certain of Calvinism, right? You know, like we are in. Yeah. And so they don't tick the box for deconstructing, actually. They just tick the box as someone that has evolved their faith, maybe. They've changed those core values, but they haven't let go of their certainty. And I think that's actually just a later stage in human development, is to start to hold your values a bit looser and lighter. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting component. And I think that was the thing that jumped out at me is I was like, I think these terms are so problematic anyway. Deconstruction, I mean, the fact it's called deconstruction is really problematic, right? Because we think of a house being deconstructed or knocked down or something. So it feels very destructive in itself, right? It does. And I think I saw a couple of people commenting on your thing going, you can't deconstruct without reconstructing. Like it's kind of like this cyclical thing. You can't get rid of one belief without embracing a new belief. Often it happens the other way around. You find a new belief and go, that makes more sense. And you chuck the old one out, or however that works. It's really interesting. Yeah. Do you have thoughts on that? Like, give me some thoughts or initial thoughts. That's
so interesting. Well, I don't think I've ever heard deconstruction defined like that, you know? I don't think I've ever heard it defined in a concrete way. That's super.
It took us a long time to do that, so that's probably why.
Yeah. So I think I think that is a process that is incredibly painful. And that's why we are so often resistant to it. And for me, I mean, it's weird. There's a part of me that embraced that journey and really liked it. Maybe that's the contrarian sort of like challenger part of me or whatever. But then there's another part that really grieved the loss of the old belief set and the old way of seeing things and the old way of, I guess, orienting myself and making my way in the world, right? When you make something new, you know, it's like whenever you start doing something new for the first time, you kind of suck at it, you know? And so like developing, you know, your own meaning, for instance, or like you know, like trying to grow beyond a perspective that's just something that you inherited. When you first embark on that journey, you are going to suck at it, right? And you're going to have to be confronting people in your spheres of influence that are practiced at defending the old way of being.
Yeah.
And so at the very moment where you are the least proficient at like asserting your own meaning and your own perspective, and you're the doubting yourself the most, right at that very moment, you're confronted with a community very often that's very good at defending the old way. And it can just be really, really difficult for people. Because I mean, I know so many people, and I'm sure you do too, that they question, but as soon as they like bring up a question, they feel like they get like a quick answer from their community or their pastor or their church or whatever. And then it's just sort of like, okay, well, just now we dealt with that. Now stop talking about it. And I know so many people who don't feel like their questions have really been answered, but they don't feel like they don't feel a resolution. You know, it's like they've been brushed aside, and they don't have the confidence to be like, no, like this is a real problem, and this has not been addressed, this has not been fixed. And it takes a lot of, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you're familiar with the Enneagram. I'm an 8, so I'm the challenger. So like for me, it's in my nature to be like, what? No. I don't buy that. And to challenge authority and to challenge existing views. But for some people, it's just too exhausting. Like for my wife, she's just like, oh, I just can't, like, you know, I can't do. I can't think about this as much as you do. I can't read about it as much as you do. I can't challenge it as much as you do, even though she agrees with me and she's gone on this journey with me and she feels a lot of the same things that I feel. So I think for different people it shows up in different ways and different timelines. And one of the things that you're doing that I really appreciate is that you're making an effort to create community around this process. And a lot of times people need, I mean, if this is a journey, people don't want to take the journey alone, and it's and for good reason, you know. It's not an easy journey.
It's terrifying. And especially like you're talking about there, this early stage, you're so fragile because you really are going, I have no idea. All I know is I'm really not very confident about what I used to believe, and I have no real confidence in anything else right now, other than I'm pretty sure what I used to believe is wrong. I don't know what's right. And then you've got all these people barking at you going, well, this is wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And then you're looking for a community. Maybe you stumble across the word deconstruction and you find that. But what you find is not much certainty there either, because I talked to one deconstructing person and they're an atheist. Another one is an agnostic. And another one went to become a progressive Christian. Another one went into Orthodox Christianity. Another one's a Buddhist. And you're like, so where the feck am I going? Like, what's going on here? Like, what is happening? It's very destabilizing. And I think this is the importance of community is just helping people, even if it is this very varied landscape, seeing people that are just a little bit further along on the general thing of becoming more comfortable with your uncertainty. So if you're deconstructing that third component of having less certainty in your life, and you talk to most people that are older, that's a part of growing up. You start to realize the world's a little bit less black and white. It's a little bit more gray. There isn't as much certainty. How many times do old people say to young ones, they're like, well, when you grow up, you'll maybe feel a bit different, you know?
Yeah.
And it's usually not because they're being fundamental about something. They're just saying, well, maybe you might realize there's a few flaws in that perfect plan you've come up with at 17. I'm still like that, right? I still go, I've got it. And then I'm trying to remember, I've felt like that before. But so I think one of the things that community does is it just helps you kind of be around people that are a bit more okay with being uncertain. Even if they are atheist or agnostic or spiritual or whatever, they can go, look, you're going to find a bit more peace about this. You're going to find that there can be meaning that you can construct or whatever. And I think the danger is that people that don't find that, they don't find some safe people to kind of look towards and grow with, is, we mentioned at the beginning, people are looking for this authority figure. They're looking for certainty. I find this, and I frequently recognize it in my messages, people coming to me as their next guru, their next pastor, their next authority figure. And they go, well, so what does the Bible say about this? And what do you think? And so is there a God? And is there a heaven? And I go, oh, I don't know. I'm intentionally I am going to really push their uncertainty buttons and really refuse to give them an authority to go, oh, Phil's my new answer guy. I did this for the first couple of years. When I first started doing this with people 6, 7, 8 years ago, I fell into the trap because I was like, oh, I've got some ideas and let me help you. And what I didn't realize is I was almost reconstructing people that were trying to deconstruct. I was giving them answers. And actually,
so that ended up not being helpful.
It stopped them going on the journey in a lot of ways. And maybe some people want to stop, and that's okay. But I do think we need to be careful we don't do that accidentally, become these answer people, but actually create a room for uncertainty to be okay. It's a really interesting dynamic.
I think it's okay to resist labels too. Like that's one of the things that I've wrestled with. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people have been like, so like, do you consider yourself an atheist now? Are you agnostic? And are you, like, what are you? And none of those terms seem to sum up where I feel like I'm at.
Yeah.
And so I've just kind of gotten content with not using them.
Yeah.
Because and realizing that when we ask someone, are you a Christian, or are you an atheist, or are you agnostic, or are you a Buddhist, or what have you, like, what's happening there is you're trying to take a shortcut. You're trying to use a word to skip past a bunch of conversations.
Yeah. I don't really want to get to know you. I want to know which box you fit in.
Yes. And so, and unfortunately, like, it's not like the words are meaningless. They do have meaning. And it's not like you shouldn't ever use the word Christian or atheist or something like that. But I've tried to resist the urge to ask people to identify as one, because what I'd rather do is have this conversation and discover that your views are very nuanced. And I want to know about that, and your experience and your perspective, and if you choose to use a label in that conversation, then great, you can do that. But you're only going to do that if you feel like it really reflects where you're at. And so I sort of use labels like that very hesitantly, because I just don't think it. There isn't a word out there that I feel like sums it up for me.
That's me.
Yeah. I don't. There isn't. I haven't found one.
Yeah.
So
Jon Steingard. There you go. There's two.
There's two.
It's if you combine them just right. There's the thing with the labels is like they're so flawed anyway, right? Because if I said to you, I'm a Christian, right? What would you do with that information, right? You'd be like, oh, what kind of Christian is he? Like, right? I mean, immediately, because you're like, I know enough about Phil that makes me question that statement. right? Or whatever, right?
Well, and how many times growing up as a Christian, how many times did you say like something along the lines of, oh, well, like, oh, so and so, they're not like a real Christian. You know?
Right. Oh no, they're Catholic.
They're Catholic.
They're First Baptists. We're not First Baptists.
It's always the Catholics.
Oh gosh, it was an easy one, right? Because we've made up our mind on that 500 years ago. Whereas it's more nuanced. Do we keep the Pentecostal ones in or not? Because they're only 100 years old. So
and it's like with the Catholics. Yeah. Oh, they're so bound up in superstition and legalism. That's not Christianity. and then you sort of go through the process of deconstruction. And you look back and you're like, oh, superstition and legalism, huh?
Interesting. But then you realize, oh gosh, I'm still doing this on some other level.
Still
probably
doing it.
It's so consistent. But yeah, with the label thing, like it just is so problematic. Someone goes, "Are you a Christian still?" And I'm like, well, what does that mean to you? I could say yes and make you happy, because I could say, yeah, I'm a Christian. I grew up a Christian. A vast majority of what I believe has been framed by Christianity. I love Jesus. There's lots of things I could say that, yeah, cool, Christian. But that doesn't mean what you want it to mean. So if I say yes, are we done here? Or am I setting you up for disappointment? Because if you follow me for another 10 minutes, you're going to be really angry. Because Christians don't do X.
Right.
And so it's such a problematic thing, because even the labels, even something like atheist or agnostic, can mean slightly different things to different people. Yeah. And so it sets us up for heartbreak, disappointment, frustration, because we don't like when our stories get challenged, right? And so if I start creating a story around you before I even know you, I'm going to get upset because you're probably not going to fit the box that I put you in. It's fascinating. It's really interesting. Yeah. And it's amazing do you get this? Like how much people do not accept that answer?
What, the non-answer?
Yeah, like going, I'm just not choosing to label. I don't really identify with anything right now. People get pissed about that. I've found.
I haven't encountered that a ton.
Okay.
What I've encountered more is people thinking that they know which word applies to me without me saying it. And then, making assumptions based on that. So especially now it's like a lot of people will be like, well, you're an atheist. And I'll be like, well, did I say I was an atheist? And even like, it's a weird thing, right? Because like Buddhists, for example, Buddhists don't believe in God per se. So they're not theists.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't really be accurate to call them atheists, right? I mean, like it's not a word that you would use to describe a Buddhist. It might technically be right, but like that doesn't do it doesn't it's not a word that like makes sense to label them as.
Yeah.
And so I kind of feel that way. Like, I'm just like, well, I think, because I don't consider myself a theist at this point, but, I just finished this book by John Shelby Spong called Why Christianity Must Change or Die, which is like, I have a feeling that title was not his idea, because it doesn't, his tone is so, his tone is so kind and gentle and like, and not aggressive or adversarial, but that title is pretty aggressive and adversarial. So I'm like, maybe a publisher thought that was a good idea.
That's funny.
I don't know. But his in that book, his question is, can you be a Christian without being a theist? Which is a really interesting question. It's like, well, can you consider yourself a Christian without believing in like a literal God being? And Spong more thinks about God as like an essence, more like the ground of being, like Tillich's ground of being. And so that I'm very curious about that. Like, are there spiritual practices that can be incorporated into your life that kind of resemble Christianity, but without being theistic in nature? And I don't know. Maybe. So I'm curious about that, and I the journey's never over, man. That.
Well, that's it.
So I continue to find myself curious about spiritual things and about Christianity and about God, whatever God means. And I'm dissatisfied with pure physical reductionism.
Yeah.
I'm just dissatisfied. It's not enough for me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people feel that way.
Do you feel, do you still feel what you may have felt like very early on, like that initial drive is going, well, this is wrong. I need to find what's right. Do you still feel this drive to go, I need to figure this out? Or does it feel, you still feel that driven, like, I got this. I need to figure it out.
Yeah, because I still, like, every couple of months I'll find a new idea that blows my mind. And that proves to me that I haven't exhausted this, this realm of inquiry, you know?
Do you think there is an exhausting? Do you think there is I don't know. Because that can be, in some sense, almost reductionistic of, like, if we just look at this long enough, hard enough, with the biggest telescope or magnifying glass we can find, we'll get there. We'll figure it out. Like, do you feel like there is this component of, like, we can figure this out, we can arrive, we can become the Buddha and become enlightened, or whatever, or become Enoch and walk off into the sky with God, or whatever the tradition of your fancy. But there, in different traditions, there is we did it. You got there. Do you think there is?
Probably not. But hold on.
No worries.
I can fix that.
Don't worry.
So this is one of the disadvantages of using a DSLR. It has a very long lasting battery, but it is a battery.
Yeah. It doesn't run off power? You can't, like, plug it in and just run it off the power?
I have to get it. It doesn't. No, I have to get a dummy battery.
Dang.
But I'm back now.
Welcome back.
Probably, to answer your question, probably not, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't know is a phrase I'm getting a lot more comfortable with.
Yeah. Do you think there was a specific thing that occurred that caused you to feel more comfortable with the I don't know? Like, can you kind of mark a point in your journey where you went, oh, gee, I don't know, but it's okay. Whereas before you were kind of like, I don't know, and it's freaking me out. It's terrifying. It's frustrating.
I think it was a sense of exhaustion for me, of just like, I'm tired of not being willing to not know, like I think the desire to learn more and to understand more was fueling my sort of deconstruction process. And once I started it, there was so much there, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like there's things in the Bible I did not realize were in the Bible, like Numbers 31, how God basically told Israel to take sex slaves, or like was totally fine with it. Like that's horrifying. And no wonder no one told me about that particular passage.
There was never a Sunday service on that one in your church?
No, funny enough. But there's all these things in Christianity that once I started taking it apart, I'm like, well, that is sort of messed up, and or really messed up, and so there was some momentum there of like, okay, I'm going to get to the truth of this. I'm going to get to the truth of this, but I never felt like I arrived. I felt like it was always like, well, okay, I've made some progress, but there's so much more there, and it's like like I told you earlier, like I did reach a point where eventually I had to start building something new that I could use to live. Because I was taking apart my old way of looking at the world, and I needed a new one. And for a time, I feel like I tried on a number of different, perspectives on the world and reality, and none of them felt like they encapsulated the whole thing. Yeah. It's almost like every perspective, every religion, every way of looking at the world is like touching the edge of something. And like we're all, it's the old metaphor of like the elephant. I'm sure you've heard this metaphor.
Right. Yeah,
it's like a bunch of people. I don't know if I'm going to get this right, but this is how I remember it. There's a bunch of us, and we're all grasping in the dark, trying to figure out what it is we're touching. And it's an elephant, but whoever's touching, the trunk thinks it's a tree. Whoever's touching the ear thinks it's like a velvety, something or other. I'm butchering this metaphor, but it's like we all seeing in part, you know, and Second Corinthians, you know, like, then I saw in part, you know, or like right now I see in part, but in the future I'll see the whole. And I think that's the desire for all of us. That's the thing that fuels this process, is like, I want to understand the whole, but can we ever understand the whole? I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah, it's interesting. Someone the other day was talking about hell as being like, heaven, about like, you know, when we get there, we finally know everything and we know God perfectly and we know absolutely everything there is to ever know, and we know everything about every part, you know, I don't know, we just suddenly absorb all truth and knowledge. And I'm like, that kind of sounds shit. Like, there's a moment where you're like at the end of the movie where it all comes together and you're like, oh yes, that makes sense, and it amazes you, and that would be nice, right?
Yes, but then the movie.
But then you've got eternity going, what do I do now? Right? I mean,
right.
I and I don't know if there is an eternity or a heaven, or, you know, but this idea of like getting it down anyway, I'm kind of like, I kind of enjoy the figuring it out. Like, I kind of enjoy this process on some level.
So here's something that I've stumbled across recently that sort of wrecked me. A big part of my process has been the problem of evil, which I'm sure it is for a lot of people. It's
sure, like, well,
if God is all powerful and all loving, why is there so much evil in the world? And you know, you can have that philosophical conversation, and there's so much there that we could touch on. But what I find interesting is, like, why is there good? You know, it's almost like the reverse problem of evil. It's like, well, why does evil exist if God exists? Well, then it's like, well, why does good exist if you know, where does all this come from?
If God doesn't.
And I'm not, you know, I'm not saying good can't exist without God, but it is curious that good exists. I'm curious about that. Well, and then I think about Immanuel Kant had this idea, like, he actually thought that it would be, I'm trying to remember how he formulated it exactly, but he basically was like, the fact that things are hard is what makes them meaningful. And if they weren't hard, they wouldn't mean anything. So when we struggle and when we face challenges and we face hardship, that's actually what's bringing meaning to our lives, is overcoming those things. And so a world with no evil and a world with no suffering, you know, I have a huge issue with suffering, and it's been so the last thing I would want to do is minimize how hard life is for people.
Sure.
But I also go, like, if absolutely everything was frictionless and easy, and would there be less meaning in my life? And I think the answer to that is yes. And I don't know what to do with that duality, because on one hand, I'm so grieved by the suffering I see in the world and how hard life can be for so many people. But then on the other hand, I go like, well, if it was, at least for myself, like, if I didn't have any challenges to overcome, what would bring me meaning in life? And so there's this non-dualistic sort of truth here. It's like suffering is horrible, but to a degree, I don't know what meaning my life would have without it.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, there's obviously, like, there's the risk of minimizing people's suffering, which I do not want to do.
Sure, absolutely.
But I also, you know, look at that and I go like, well, what do I do with that? And I don't know. I don't know again, you know? The only thing I can think to do with it is cultivate a sense of humility and go like, okay, like, on one side of the coin, it doesn't really make sense to believe in an all-loving and all-powerful God in the face of so much suffering. But then I think Kant is right, that without anything to contend with in life, you know, life would be much less meaningful.
Yeah. It's interesting. This is how I love Buddhism, and I really resonate and kind of am drawn to a lot of Buddhist kind of tenets. And someone I think that makes it so practical and applicable is someone called Byron Katie. I don't know if you've come across Byron Katie's stuff.
The work.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely incredible. But like, just, recognizing that suffering is me telling a story about a thing that isn't that way. It's perception reality, right? So you go, it could be horrific. It could be my mother died about 3 years ago, coming up for 3 years. Very young, 59.
Wow,
and
that is young.
The suffering there is people shouldn't die at 59.
Yeah.
People should live 80 years or 90 years or whatever, right? But people should live a certain amount of time. So if someone dies at 30, if someone dies at 50, it's wrong. Well, is it? Because it happened. So I can create a story that says that was wrong, or I can go, well, this happened. It is. There's no, me wanting it to be different doesn't change anything apart from create a lot of inner turmoil. So there's this kind of component of like, you erase suffering on a sense by going, well, things happen because they happen. Like reality is king, reality is what is. And this is something I really wrestle with Buddhism. I talked about it with her husband, actually, Stephen Mitchell. He's a Zen Buddhist. He knows his shit. He's got it down. Yeah. You talk to him and you're like, yeah, okay, just keep talking. Like, just tell me how to live life. It will be fine. Yeah. And I was trying to get out of him, and he did say some profound things, but I just think on some level, it's the looking at something and going, okay, that happened. Sure. Yeah, it happens. So me not creating a story around it and not creating any pain or suffering around it. Sure, I could do that. But would I then stop it happening to the next person? You look at who develops the best cancer treatments. It's people that lost someone to cancer. Who creates airbags in cars. Someone who just got, like, their wife got decapitated going to the grocery store at 12 miles an hour, or whatever, it's like cars were not good initially. And if we all were kind of like, yeah, they died. Okay. If we somehow, even if we, through a spiritual mechanism or a psychological mechanism, got rid of suffering, we wouldn't move forward, I think.
Right.
We'd be very static. It is that tension, that going, world shouldn't be this way. I'm going to make it the way I want it to be, the way I think it should be. What is that? What is the thing where we say, this is good, this is bad, this is the way it should be, this is the way it shouldn't be? We talk about morality, but like, morality, it seems on some levels very universal. It seems in other levels very culturally contextual, and it seems very historically contextual. But we all agree at some point, well, this is it, right? We all have an ethic of some sort. Even if it's different, we go, no, the world should be this way, and you're not allowed to do that because that's wrong. Or where does that come from? Like, what is that? It's a fascinating question to explore.
I think life is very curious, and the more deeply you dive into things, the more often you run into things that feel contradictory. And it's difficult. I feel like you bump into a contradiction in almost any pursuit if you go deep enough. And that's, I don't know what to do with that. I think it's really curious. Yeah.
Oh, it's fascinating. It's really, really interesting. I love it. Oh, Jon, this has been amazing. I've really enjoyed chatting.
Great talk, man.
Absolutely loved it. You're one of my favorite people to chat to. Honestly,
thanks, man. You too.
This is just, I love just sitting down, chatting, and I don't even know. Like, I'm going to have to, I tried to take a few notes as we were talking because I'm just so engrossed in the conversation. I'm going to forget everything we said.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, who knows what this will be called? A rambling with Jon Steingard. We could just,
we covered a lot of ground.
We really did. It was great, and we'll have to do it again at some point as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that I know you were saying, what is the motivation to still be in this space? What is the motivation to still get on a podcast or do that? But personally, I love it. I love the way that you are approaching these conversations. I love the way you're putting your stuff out there. I love the way that you are giving people space to engage with this and explore it. And you're a husband, you're a dad, you've got a company you're running, you're doing your videography. Like, you don't need this shit in your life, right? Like, but there's so many people that really appreciate it.
But I kind of do, is what I'm finding. Like, I kind of do need it. and I do feel like this is part of what's bringing my life meaning right now. Is sometimes I get tired and I pull back, like especially on social media. Like I have the last month or two, I've pulled back quite a bit, partially because it's like the election stuff is so weird and everything was so charged here. It's like I just didn't want to add my hot take to all these things. But then I get a message from someone who's in a very real life scenario and they're struggling with, whether it's their faith or their culture or their sexuality, and somehow something that I've said or written was meaningful to them in a way. And I go, oh, like that means something to me. I really, if me sharing this process can be meaningful to anyone else who's walking a similar path, then like, yeah, I want to do that. So that's kind of that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. And if that's not a beautiful meaning to create, is helping people find meaning. I mean, like, right? If that's all we're doing good. Is we're making this world a bit better for everyone.
Yeah.
Like that seems good.
I've been thinking about following in your footsteps and starting a podcast.
You need to, yes.
And how would you feel about me using this conversation as episode 1?
Whoa. Okay. Yeah. Do it. Absolutely. That's amazing.
But tell me about the etiquette of that, because this is like your show. And we had this conversation with the assumption that it was for your thing.
Yeah, but we can have it for your show. Both? That's fine. No, or we can do both. Yeah, I mean, both might even be a kind of cool, fun crossover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that cool or is that weird?
Yeah. No, that's cool. I like it.
If it's weird, you can tell me it's weird.
No, it's not weird at all. It's just awesome. I mean, it brings value to both sets of people, for sure. So no, yeah, if you want to, let's do that. I mean, I'm also very happy to just come on and do another one, or you can have one where, we have another conversation. But this was a good combo. I feel like
this conversation was so great because it was so back and forth, and you shared about, your thought process, and it was such a ping pong. If you're comfortable with it, I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's do it. Let's do a joint podcast coming out.
Yeah.
I don't know when you want to release your podcast, but I am on a tight schedule right now because I was planning on bringing your episode out on Monday.
Oh, that's fine.
Is that all right?
No, that's fine. Yeah. What I might do, I probably won't put anything out until early next year.
Cool.
But I still think this conversation's evergreen,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's why I love about these kind of like just sit down and just blah, like, right? I mean, what are we doing? We just go, what's happening in life? What is going on? What is meaning? And we just bounce back and forth.
Yeah.
I love that because when is that ever going to not be relevant?
Yeah.
And I always try and get my podcast to be a conversation. And it's funny. We talk about like, does anything ever get in your head or like, how you're doing it gets in my head a lot, the comments, because the negative comment I get about my podcast consistently is shut up and let the other person talk. That's what I'm here to listen to. You got this great person on. I want to hear them talk. And I'm like, it really eats away at me sometimes. I'm like, maybe I should just not have as much of a conversation. But then I'm like, well, actually, they're going to just do the same spiel otherwise, right? Is it going to be unique if there's not? That's it. Like, it needs to be a conversation. So I love that. And that's why I'm always trying to create that.
Yeah, it's like there's different kinds of interviews too. And it's like a back and forth is way more interesting to me than, like part of the reason, like if I tune into Sam Harris's podcast or Tim Ferriss or Rob Bell or whatever, part of the reason I'm tuning in is because I want their perspective. And so that's people that listen to your podcast. They don't just want to, they want to hear Phil Drysdale. You know what I mean? It's like, well, if I may be the guest today, but you, it's your thing and people want your perspective. And I think that's
I've nuked a lot of my really early podcasts if you've gone private now. But if you go back and listen to them, back in the day, they would work very much. I was just like, I tried to get people to monologue, like, tell me about this topic. And they, all right, what about this? And but people sent me messages going, Phil, like, can you like either do some episodes where you just talk or like, cause we just want to hear you a bit more. And so I was like, Oh, I never thought about that. Like, it's hard to think about people wanting to listen to you, right? You're like, I get all these amazing guests on, and I'm like, I'm not in the mix for that. You know, I'm not one of these amazing guests. That's why I'm having this thing. But I do think there's something beautiful about a conversation. And honestly, I want to have this conversation. And you know, I listen to a lot of these people like, you know, Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan, a lot of these people. Like, I'm like, I'm listening to this because it's a conversation. It's an interesting conversation.
And Joe inserts himself into it a ton.
Non-stop, right? I mean, you know, I'm an expert on foot fungus. Well, have you ever done DMT? You know, I mean, like, obviously, you know.
That's the answer. Yeah. That's the
answer every time,
every
right?
Question.
You know.
Well, yeah,
but you know, do you do jujitsu? Like, you know, every time, like, you know, world-leading expert on volcanoes. Have you ever tried Brazilian jiu-jitsu though? That's the way it is, isn't it?
On a technical level, so question for you. I've been recording, I have the audio locally. I've been recording this whole time. So I have like my audio locally. I was using a recorder down here to record my video. But then
did it cut off with the battery?
A little bit before that, I noticed it about an hour 21 into the conversation. I guess my card filled up. I didn't realize that was going to happen. So I started recording here on Ecamm. So
to be honest, you look pretty good on Zoom, so I can always use that as a backup anyway. But if you want to send me what you've got, that's fine. But if it's a lot of hassle, if it's broken up into lots of bits, and
do you want me to just send you the audio, maybe?
Yeah, it's fine.
Or do you typically use the audio through Zoom?
I usually use the audio through Zoom and then clean it up. But if you've got a local audio, I'll definitely take it because it's always better.
Well, why don't I send you the local audio, and then if you want some video, I can send that.
Yeah, I can. I'll let you know if the video is crap, but it looks great anyway, so it's fine.
And then I wondered, you know, if you wouldn't mind, because I wasn't recording video in your video.
I can send you the video.
If whatever video you put together, you know, if
I have a separate camera. That's why if you ever notice I'm looking slightly off to the side, it's because I'm very limited in my options. But I have just a regular HD kind of handy cam thing.
Oh, cool.
So
yeah.
It's not gonna. It'll make you look good. I'll be a good episode to have first.
Right.
And though that saying that, as someone that does interviews, like, get ready. Some people, they're like, I'm in a darkened room with the window behind me, and I'm recording on my headset, which I keep hitting off my face as I'm recording it.
Right.
Like, great. Yeah. Perfect. You've nailed it.
Yeah.
It's all good. So yeah. Oh, there we go. See?
There we go.
What is this camera?
Well, I'll send you this. I'll send you this audio, and then let me know if you need anything else.
No, absolutely, will do. It's great, dude. I'm looking forward to your podcast. I'm excited, really excited.
Yeah, I mean, what I want to do is I want to do a podcast and YouTube show basically, and basically explore going beyond previous, points of view. So I haven't totally figured out the name for it yet, but all the most interesting conversations I have are pushing the boundaries of previous thought or belief. And so that's why I've been mulling this over, and I have a list of people that I kind of want to talk to, and you were on my list, and I was like, well, I know we're going to talk today. So depending on how the conversation goes, I wondered if it might make sense to do something like a joint episode or something like that. But I just kind of wanted to see where the conversation went. And as you were talking, when you defined deconstruction, I was like, that's it. Because that's such a good starting point.
Yeah.
Because it can be a kind of a floaty thing.
That's the goal. I mean, what we're doing with the research, I'm literally launching the research, our first report next week. I can send you a copy actually if you want.
Oh, please do, yeah.
But it's just an initial start. But the goal was, can we define deconstructing Christians, and then what information can we get from them early on? And then we're going to keep building this over years. And so we're going to, with every new survey, we can do a survey about race. We can do a survey about views of Christianity. We can do a survey about, and we can compound the information. So it's going to be not only oh, this age bracket thinks this about the Bible, and this. It can also be 4 surveys ago when we asked about race, people that think this about race also think this about the Bible. And they also think this next survey we're going to do about, your views on other religions, that's also tied to, how often you went to church before you deconstructed, all these different things, we're going to be starting to pull together. So I'm so excited because, like you said, people don't know the definition of something as simple as deconstruction, which is getting thrown around. It's really frustrating when, I'm watching a lot of big names in this space not really, they know what they're talking about as far as a practical helping people out, and they're doing the best jobs out there, way better than me in a lot of ways. And yet they're dropping the ball so much in what annoys me is because they're the big names, they then are going to get asked for a comment when the next Josh Harris or Jon Steingard falls. They'll ask all the pastors, and then they ask, someone else, and they give their statement. And I'm like, that isn't technically correct. You're not giving data. If there's any way to combat this false rhetoric, all the kind of crap that people say about deconstruction, it's with cold, hard data. You can say, look, this actually isn't what's happening. They don't just all become atheists. Let me tell you, 15% become atheists, 32% become agnostic, 18% still hold on to their Christian faith. If we can start giving people data like that, dude, it's huge, really huge. So I'm excited. Anyway, I'll let you get into your day, man.
Oh,
it's 6:30 already. The day's flying away from you.
Yeah, I know. It's getting away on me. Yeah, thanks so much, man.
Love you, man. I'll catch you later, yeah?
Yep. Take care.
Peace. Ciao.
All right, bye-bye.